take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Our great God, you're awesome and mighty. We worship you, and we worship you alone. Now may the words of this preacher's mouth and the meditations of these collected worshiping hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. And the people of God said, Amen. I'm taking my cue, the title of this sermon, from verse 2 of Genesis 22. Then God said, "Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him." I'm calling this, "You want my what?" My only son? When I was in middle school, high school, and college, I liked tests, at least in subjects in which I was strong. I didn't like science tests, I didn't like math tests, but I loved tests in music and English and history, because the tests gave me opportunity to show off what I knew. Listen to this text. It came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. You'll see the same word test in the Hebrews 11, verses 17 to 19 passage that was read earlier in the service. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. This text intrigues me. Isn't Isaac the son that Abraham and Sarah waited for? Isn't Isaac the child of promise? You want me to offer him up? The whole future of their line depended on Isaac. How are we going to have the line grow if you want me to kill him? What kind of test is this? In both Hebrews 11:17 and Genesis 22:1, we read Abraham was tested. I'm not sure Abraham liked tests as much as I did when I was in middle school, high school, and college. And certainly not this test. Wasn't the humiliation of Sarah being barren enough of a test? God, why do you want to test me again? Wasn't having a child with Hagar at Sarah's insistence, wasn't that test enough? Wasn't leaving Haran at age 75 test enough? Well, apparently not, because God tests him again. You know, some of us will never experience what God has for us because we are busy telling him why this test is not necessary. And we're busy telling him that his outlandish commands and calls don't make sense. But this text is about the anguish of faith. That to walk with God means that sometimes you'll be stretched beyond belief and beyond what you think is your capacity. Sometimes being a serious believer, and I'm not talking about being a church person, being a serious believer sometimes just doesn't feel good. It hurts to follow God sometimes. We're called to do what doesn't make sense. Now here in this text, Abraham is addressed. Walter Brueggemann, in his commentary on the book of Genesis, says that Abraham is a man ready to be addressed. Listen to it. 3 times in Genesis 22, Abraham is called. He's called once by God in verse 1. He's called by his son in verse 7. And then he's called by the angel of the Lord in verse 11. And every time that one of them says, Abraham, he says, here I am. Now don't miss that. He is a man ready to be addressed. When the Eternal addresses Abraham, Abraham answers. When God calls his name, he doesn't say, oh, what do you want now? Again? No, it's the here I am. He readies himself for an engagement with the Eternal that will be literally life-changing. And he has to start off with answering the address of the Eternal. God says, Abraham. Some of us would not answer for fear of what he's going to ask for now, again. Abraham, verse 1, here I am. His son, Father, here I am. Angel of the Lord, verse 11, here I am. He never fails to respond. The Abraham we meet in this text is the Abraham who responds to the eternal when called. I want to be a man who says to God and others, "Here I am," rather than, "What do you want now?" I want to posture myself as the "here I am" person. What if God is using, this is just my thinking out loud, what if God is using this test to give Abraham an outrageous testimony? There is no testimony without a test. What would happen if we all said, "Here I am," to God in every area of life? What would happen if we yielded and said, "Here I am," in the area of finances and sexuality and domestic chaos and our relationships? What would happen if we said, here I am. Whatever you have for me, here I am. Now, this test is comprised of at least 3 parts. I want to get through them. And we won't see these 3 parts in a straight sequence. We'll see them interwoven and ebbing and flowing through the narrative. There is an outrageous command, an equally outrageous submission to the command, and the application of theology to the command/test. An outrageous command, an equally outrageous submission to the command, and the application of theology. I'm going to go through it quickly. Here's the outrageous command. I want your boy. Give him up. Slice him, dice him. I want you to bind him, and I want you to put him on an altar, and then I want you to stab him, kill him. Let his blood run there on the makeshift altar on the mountain. That's really what God said. It's not, would you be willing to give your son to the ministry if asked? No, I want you to kill him. It's a gruesome, violent command. You don't need to see this as a sanitized text. This is very violent. Did you see it? Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there, Genesis 22:2, as a burnt offering. I want you to kill him, then burn him. That's the command. Now look at the next verse in Genesis 22. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of the young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place God told. He's going to do it. And I don't see in this text any pushback. I don't see, now God, you know I'll give you almost anything. But you want my Pookie? You want my boy? My long-awaited boy? It's not like I have 6 sons. This is my only son. He's not even counting Ishmael now. In his mind, he's got one boy, this boy of promise. And you want me to do what? There's none of that in the text. This text says, God said, then you hear this outlandish command, and look at the submission. So Abraham rose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went to the place that God told him about. Wow. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but it is certainly my aspiration to do what God says without questioning him and without telling him that I have a better idea. This is maturity here. To so walk with God that you do what he says because he said it. And you trust him that he would never ask of you anything which would not bring him glory and bring you growth. But that's a trust issue, isn't it? This outlandish command, give me your boy. This equally outlandish submission to the command of God. Abraham knows something about this God because Abraham applies theology. And theology just means the study of the nature of God. Theos, logos. Theos, God, and logos, thought, logic, word, reason. Abraham knows something about God. In fact, he makes a statement that proves he is a theological thinker. By the way, I hope you are a student of God. I hope you are studying God, his ways. This act of binding his son to the altar is called the Akedah, translated the binding. It's almost unthinkable. But Abraham makes a statement as part of this narrative that proves he's thinking theologically. He's thinking about what God is like and what God might do. Go back with me to Genesis 22. Verse 5 interests me. I'll go back up to verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day, Abram lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." Now, Abraham has been told to sacrifice his son. And if that plays out, Abraham will come back, but there won't be any we. Unless God, who gave an outlandish command, is going to do something unusual. For Abraham to even say, "Y'all stay here with the animal, the lad and I are going to do this sacrifice thing, and we'll be back." For Abraham to say that, Abraham must know something. He doesn't know everything, but he knows something is up. The eternal is moving and is at work in me and in my circumstances, and I don't know how it's going to happen, but we'll be back. What a statement of faith. Then Abraham makes another theological statement. The first being, we'll be back. Then he tells his inquiring son, Isaac, that God will provide for himself the lamb for their sacrifice. As they're on their way up the mountain, Isaac says, "Dad, I don't mean to question you, but I see all the accoutrement of sacrifice. I see the wood, I see everything, but I don't see the actual sacrifice. Where's the lamb? Where's the animal? And Abraham says, don't have that part figured out yet, the Lord will provide. What a statement. Abraham is applying theology to his circumstances. What I know so far about God is that we'll be back and God will provide the sacrifice needed. Abraham is living somewhere between the dark command of God and the deliverance by God. He is enjoying this tension, this suspension between what God has said and promised and what God will yet do. He's right in the middle of that. God has spoken, and I don't know how, but some way, somehow, we're gonna work it out. He is suspended between God the tester, verse 1, and God the provider, verse 14. And we live much of life, don't we, between verses 1 and 14, where God has said something outrageous, and then God provides in our circumstances. I like these words from Abraham. He doesn't have all the answers, and faith does not require us to have all the answers. He only knows that he bows to a credible God, and the details are up to God. And this God has kept Abraham going as he wanders, as he lives this nomadic life of obedience. I gotta close this. I'm gonna preach the same message in the next service, and I won't have the time constraint, so I might just preach it a little longer. But I can't take my time, Doc, in this service. Let me wrap it up with this part of the text. God sees Abraham about to actually do it. This is not theoretical. He's going to do it. Let me go to verse 9 of Genesis 22. They came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac, his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. By the way, you see no pushback from Isaac. He allows himself because he trusts his father. He bound Isaac, his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay he's going to do it. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here it is again. Here I am. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God. Back to theology. God is omniscient, knows all things. So what is this phrase? One of these days I'm just going to preach on this phrase, now I know. I thought he already knew. What do you mean, now I know? You know all things, God, from the beginning. So what do you mean, now I know? You knew what Abraham would do. What do you mean? God cannot learn anything. Theology teaches us that. You study the nature of God. He knows all things, always has known all things. He cannot even learn. So what do you mean, now I know? Well, this is an accommodation to mere mortals. That's why that's in there. Perhaps a better way of understanding this phrase is, now I see Abraham's willingness to slay Isaac is a statement of faith. Now, I got to close. I really am. It is said that we preachers, when we say I'm closing now, it's just a promise that might not be fulfilled. But Abraham is commanded to kill his seed. And I can hear Abraham gasp, "You want my what? My Isaac?" I relate to this text more than many of you do, for I have an only son. And I love Timothy. I love Timothy. And I'm not sure how I'd respond if God said, "Kill him." I love God. I walk with God. Have done so for 50 years, but I'm not sure if God asked for my Pookie Bear. But God sees Abraham's obedience. "Now I see that you fear God." And Abraham goes on to name the place, "God will provide." Beloved, the Isaac for you might not be your actual child, but might God be calling on you to lay your Isaacs down, to give him that thing that owns your heart. God is still issuing outrageous commands, and believers are still giving outrageous submission to God's commands. And we're still trying to figure out the theology. God can be trusted. The God we serve is a credible, trustworthy God. And God does not always ask that you kill your Isaac, demolish your Isaac, forsake your Isaac, give it up completely, but God does want to know if you would dare bind it and lay it on the altar. We sang a hymn when I was growing up. It was written in 1900 by Elisha A. Hoffman. I've not heard it for a while. "You've longed for sweet peace and for faith to increase, and have earnestly, fervently prayed, but you cannot have rest or be perfectly blessed until all on the altar is laid." This morning, I'm going to ask you to lay your Isaac down, to give up that which occupies your heart and your passion and your attention, and give it to God. And maybe the Isaac you need to lay down is you.